It was supposed to be just another Thanksgiving. Quiet, family-oriented, and maybe a little boring, but that's exactly how I liked it. My wife, Melissa, loved holidays. For her, it was a chance to shine, to prove she had it all together, and, of course, to have everyone admire her cooking and hosting skills. She'd been planning this day for over a month. Every detail was meticulously thought out. The napkins matched the tablecloth. The desserts were arranged perfectly on silver platters, and the house smelled like pumpkin pie, turkey, and warm spices. She was in her element, bustling around the kitchen, shouting instructions, and obsessing over the smallest details. By midday, the guests started arriving. Family, neighbors, a few of Melissa's co-workers. The house was alive with chatter and laughter, and I did my best to keep up appearances, smiling and welcoming everyone. But deep down, something felt off. It was hard to explain, but there was this tension in the air, a subtle unease I couldn't shake. Melissa, though, was in her usual holiday mode. Charismatic, charming, and almost too perfect. As the evening wore on, I started noticing little things. Moments that didn't sit right with me. Melissa seemed particularly friendly with one of our guests, Jake, a neighbor from a few streets over. I'd never thought much of him before, just a regular guy with a big smile and a habit of showing up uninvited. Tonight, though, he seemed different. Or maybe it was Melissa who was different around him. It wasn't anything overt, but it was in the way she laughed a little too hard at his jokes, leaned in just a little too close when they talked, and found reasons to involve him in every conversation. I told myself I was imagining it, that it was just my mind playing tricks on me because I was tired from helping with all the preparations. But as the night went on, the nagging feeling only grew stronger. Dinner was a feast, as always. Melissa outdid herself with the turkey, stuffing, and every side dish you could think of. Everyone complimented her, and she basked in the praise like a queen holding court. Jake, of course, was the loudest with his compliments. "Melissa, this is the best meal I've ever had," he said, raising his glass in a toast to her. She smiled, that bright, perfect smile, and for a moment, I felt like I was the guest in my own home. By the time dessert was served, I couldn't take it anymore. I excused myself, saying I had a headache, and went upstairs to our bedroom. I sat there in the dark, trying to push away the growing doubts in my mind. I told myself I was overreacting, that this was just paranoia. But then I heard footsteps coming up the stairs. I froze, expecting Melissa to come in and check on me. Instead, the footsteps stopped just outside our room. I listened closely and heard a low whisper, followed by the soft sound of laughter. It was Melissa's voice and Jake's. My stomach dropped. I wanted to fling the door open, confront them right then and there, but I couldn't move. I sat there, paralyzed, as the laughter faded and the footsteps retreated back downstairs. I told myself there had to be an explanation, but deep down, I knew there wasn't. That night, after everyone had left and Melissa was cleaning up the kitchen, I couldn't bring myself to look at her. She asked me if I was feeling better, her voice full of concern, but I could barely mumble a response. I went to bed early, but sleep didn't come. All I could think about were those whispers outside my door. I didn't know it then, but that Thanksgiving was just the beginning. What happened that night set off a chain of events that would destroy everything I thought I knew about my life, my marriage, and the woman I thought I could trust. The morning after Thanksgiving, I woke up with a strange heaviness in my chest. Melissa was already up, humming a cheerful tune in the kitchen like nothing had happened. I forced myself out of bed and joined her, hoping that maybe I'd imagined the whole thing the night before. But as soon as I saw her, that tight smile on her face, I knew something was off. She was too cheerful, too perfect, felt rehearsed. "Morning," she chirped, sliding a cup of coffee in front of me. "I was thinking we could put up the Christmas decorations today. Get a head start." I grunted in agreement, taking a sip of the coffee. Tasted bitter, and not just because she'd forgotten the sugar. My mind kept replaying those whispers outside our bedroom door. Jake's voice, her laughter. I wanted to confront her, to demand an explanation, but I didn't know how to start. Instead, I just sat there, pretending everything was fine. The The day went by in a blur of fake smiles and forced small talk. We dragged out the Christmas tree from the garage, hung up ornaments, and played holiday music, but the tension between us was palpable. Melissa didn't seem to notice, or maybe she didn't care. She was too busy texting on her phone, her fingers flying across the screen every chance she got. By the time evening rolled around, I couldn't take it anymore. While she was in the shower, I grabbed her phone off the kitchen counter. My hands were shaking as I scrolled through her messages, half hoping I'd find nothing. But there it was, a text thread with Jake. The most recent messages were from the night before. Jake, that was risky, but it was worth it. Seeing you for just a moment made my night. Melissa, stop it, you'll make me blush. Last night was perfect. Jake, perfect because of you. I felt like the air had been knocked out of my lungs. My hands clenched around the phone as I scrolled further up, reading their casual flirtations, the inside jokes, the way she called him Jay. It wasn't explicit, but it was enough. Too much. My mind raced with possibilities. Had they been sneaking around behind my back? How long had this been going on? And how could she sit there, decorating our tree, like everything was normal? The sound of the shower turning off jolted me back to reality. I quickly put her phone back where I found it and sat at the kitchen table, trying to look calm. When she walked in, her hair wrapped in a towel, she smiled at me like nothing was wrong. I couldn't bring myself to smile back. That night I couldn't sleep. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw her and Jake together, laughing, whispering, sharing something that didn't belong to him. I wanted to confront her, to demand the truth, but a part of me was terrified of what she might say. What if she admitted it? What if she didn't even try to deny it? The next day, I decided I needed answers. Jake was hosting a football watch party at his house, and I figured it was the perfect opportunity to confront him without Melissa around. I told her I was going to run some errands and headed over to his place, my heart pounding the whole way. When I got there, the party was in full swing. Jake greeted me with his usual broad smile, handing me a beer like we were the best of friends. I stood there, gripping the bottle, watching him laugh and joke with the other guys. He didn't look guilty. He didn't look like a man who had spent Thanksgiving flirting with another man's wife. After a few minutes, I couldn't take it anymore. I pulled him aside, out to the garage where it was quieter. Jake, I said, my voice shaking, I need to ask you something, and I need you to be honest with me. He raised an eyebrow, clearly confused. Sure, man. What's up? I took a deep breath, my heart pounding in my ears. Are you involved with Melissa? For a moment, he just stared at me, his expression unreadable. Then he laughed. What? No, man. Where's this coming from? I wanted to believe him. I wanted so badly to believe him. But there was something in his eyes, a flicker of something he couldn't quite hide. He was lying. I knew it, and he knew I knew it. Jake, I said, my voice hardening. Don't lie to me. I saw the texts. His smile faltered. For a split second, he looked like a deer caught in headlights. But then he recovered, shrugging like it was no big deal. Look, man, it's not what you think. Melissa and I are just friends. She's been stressed lately, and I've been trying to cheer her up. That's all. Cheer her up, I repeated, my voice dripping with disbelief. By sneaking around and texting her all night? By whispering to her outside my bedroom door? He froze again, and this time he couldn't hide the guilt in his eyes. He didn't deny it. He didn't say a word. He just stood there, staring at me, as the weight of his silence said everything I needed to know. I left without saying another word. I couldn't stand to be in the same room as him. When I got home, Melissa was waiting for me, her face lighting up when she saw me walk through the door. But I couldn't look at her. Not after what I'd just learned. That night, as I lay awake in bed, I realized something chilling. Whatever was going on between Melissa and Jake, it wasn't over. Not yet. And I wasn't sure I was ready for what came next. The morning after my conversation with Jake, I felt like I was walking on eggshells. Melissa acted like everything was fine. Chatting over breakfast, scrolling through her phone, humming to herself while she tidied up the kitchen. I sat at the table, barely touching my coffee, watching her closely. Every smile, every laugh, every little movement felt calculated, like she was putting on a performance. I kept replaying Jake's reaction in my head, the way his confident demeanor had crumbled when I mentioned the texts and the whispers outside my door. He had all but confirmed my suspicions without saying a word. But I needed more than suspicions. I needed proof. That afternoon, while Melissa was out running errands, I did something I never thought I'd do. I installed a tracking app on her phone. It wasn't something I was proud of, but at that point, I felt like I didn't have a choice. If she was sneaking around with Jake, or anyone else, I needed to know. The first few days after that were uneventful. Melissa stuck to her usual routine: grocery store runs, yoga classes, lunch dates with her friends. Everything seemed normal, almost too normal, and I started to wonder if I'd been wrong. Maybe Jake really was just trying to cheer her up. Maybe I'd been letting my paranoia get the better of me. But then, a notification came through on the app late one night. Melissa had told me she was going to visit her sister, Sarah, to drop off some leftovers. It sounded innocent enough, but when I checked the tracker, I saw that she wasn't at Sarah's house. She was at a hotel on the other side of town. My heart started pounding as I stared at the screen. I tried to convince myself there was a reasonable explanation. Maybe she was meeting a friend, or maybe she had stopped there for some other reason. But deep down, I knew the truth. I grabbed my keys and headed out the door, barely able to breathe as I drove toward the hotel. When I got there, I parked a few spaces away from her car and waited. My hands were trembling, and my mind was racing with worst-case scenarios. After about 20 minutes, the hotel door opened, and there she was, Melissa, stepping out with Jake right behind her. They didn't see me sitting in my car. They were too busy laughing, their faces glowing with a kind of ease and happiness I hadn't seen in years. Jake placed a hand on the small of her back as they walked to his truck, and she didn't pull away. If anything, she leaned into his touch. I sat there, frozen, as they drove off. Part of me wanted to follow them to see where they were going, but I already had my answer. They were together, and it wasn't just a fling. The way she looked at him, the way they moved around each other. It was clear this wasn't something new. It had been going on for a long time. When I got home, Melissa was already there, sitting on the couch with a glass of wine like nothing had happened. "Hey," she said casually, flashing me a smile. "How was your evening?" I stared at her, my mind reeling. She didn't know I'd seen her. She didn't know I'd been at the hotel watching her with Jake. And for some reason, I didn't say anything. I just mumbled something about running errands and went upstairs to our bedroom. I couldn't face her. Not yet. That night, as I lay awake in bed, I realized I couldn't keep this to myself anymore. I needed someone to talk to, someone who could help me figure out what to do. I decided to call my brother, Matt, the next morning. He'd always been the level-headed one, the one who could see things clearly when I was too emotional to think straight. When I told him what was going on, there was a long silence on the other end of the line. "You're sure about this?" he finally asked. "I saw them, Matt," I said, my voice breaking. "At a hotel. Together. It's not just in my head." Matt sighed. "All right," he said. "Here's what you're going to do. Don't confront her yet. Gather more evidence. You need to be absolutely sure before you make a move. And when you're ready, I'll be there to back you up." I nodded, even though he couldn't see me. "Thanks, Matt. I don't know what I'd do without you." Over the next few days, I followed Matt's advice. I kept watching the tracker, kept an eye on Melissa's texts, and kept pretending everything was fine. It was exhausting, living in this constant state of suspicion and paranoia, but I needed to be certain. Then, on Saturday night, everything came to a head. Melissa said she was going out with some friends from work, but the tracker showed her heading back to the same hotel. This time, I wasn't content to just sit in my car and watch. I wanted proof, real, undeniable proof. I waited for her to go inside, then followed her in. My heart was pounding so hard I thought it might burst out of my chest. I asked the receptionist which room she was in, pretending I'd forgotten the number. To my surprise, the receptionist didn't even question me. She just pointed me toward the elevator, and told me it was room 315. When I got to the room, I stood outside the door for a long time, trying to summon the courage to knock. Finally, I raised my hand and rapped on the door. There was a moment of silence, then the sound of footsteps. The door opened, and there was Jake, standing there in nothing but a towel. The look on his face when he saw me was priceless. Pure shock and panic. "What the hell are you doing here?" he stammered. Before I could answer, Melissa appeared behind him, wrapped in a hotel robe. Her eyes went wide when she saw me, and for a moment, none of us said anything. We just stood there, frozen in a tableau of awkward silence. Finally, Melissa found her voice. What are you doing here?" she asked, her voice trembling. "I could ask you the same thing," I said, my voice cold. "But I think I already know the answer." And with that, I turned and walked away, leaving them standing there in the doorway. I didn't have the energy for a confrontation. Not yet. I had bigger plans. They thought they could get away with this, but they were wrong. They had no idea what was coming. When I got home that night, I felt an eerie calm settle over me. It was as though the storm raging inside me had suddenly quieted. But not because I was at peace. No, it was the kind of calm that comes before something breaks. Melissa returned home hours later, pretending nothing had happened. She walked into the living room where I was sitting and gave me her usual cheerful smile. "You're up late," she said casually, as though she hadn't just spent the evening with another man. I didn't respond. I just looked at her, studying her face, her movements, her false composure. She walked over to me, leaned down, and kissed me on the cheek. Her lips felt cold. "How was your night?" I asked, my tone neutral, almost disinterested. "It was great," she replied quickly, a little too quickly. "Just some girl talk and a lot of wine. You know how it is." I nodded, forcing myself to keep my expression blank. "Sounds fun." I couldn't believe how easily she lied, how effortlessly she looked me in the eye and pretended everything was fine. I wanted to scream, to confront her right then and there, but I knew better. I needed to stay calm. I needed to stick to the plan. The next morning, I called Matt and told him everything. He was furious, even more so than I expected. "You can't let her get away with this," he said. "She's making a fool out of you." "I know," I said quietly, "but I need to handle this the right way. I want her to see what she's done. I want her to feel it." Matt agreed to help me. We spent the rest of the day making plans, figuring out how to expose Melissa and Jake without giving them any room to deny it. I wanted the truth to hit them like a freight train, to leave no doubt in anyone's mind about what they had done. By the time I hung up the phone, I felt a strange sense of determination. For the first time in weeks, I wasn't just reacting to what was happening around me. I was taking control, and it felt good. Melissa spent the day acting like the perfect wife, cooking breakfast, chatting about Christmas plans, even suggesting we watch a movie together that evening. I played along, pretending everything was fine, even though my heart was pounding in my chest the entire time. But as the day went on, I started noticing cracks in her facade. She was jumpy, checking her phone constantly and laughing nervously at nothing in particular. It was as though she could sense that something was coming, even if she didn't know exactly what. That night, after she had gone to bed, I sat in the living room, staring at her phone on the kitchen counter. I knew it was risky, but I couldn't resist. I picked it up and started scrolling through her messages again. This time I found something new. A text from Jake sent earlier that day. "Jake, we need to be careful. I think he knows something. Melissa, he doesn't. He's clueless. Just stay calm." Clueless. That word cut deeper than I expected. Was that really how she saw me? As some blind fool who couldn't see what was right in front of him? I put the phone down, my hands trembling with rage, and decided then and there that I wasn't going to wait any longer. It was time to act. I sent Matt a text, telling him it was happening tomorrow. He replied almost instantly, "I'll be there." I didn't sleep that night. I just lay there in the dark, staring at the ceiling, my mind racing with thoughts of what was about to happen. By the time the sun came up, I felt like a man on a mission. This wasn't just about exposing Melissa and Jake anymore. It was about reclaiming my dignity, my life, and my sense of self. Melissa greeted me with her usual smile that morning, completely unaware of what was coming. She had no idea that everything she thought she had hidden so carefully was about to be dragged out into the light. And I couldn't wait to watch it all unfold. The next morning, I woke up early, my stomach a knot of nerves and anticipation. Melissa was still asleep, her face peaceful, like she had no care in the world. It disgusted me. How could she lie so easily, sleep so soundly, while betraying everything we'd built together? I stood there for a moment watching her before turning away. Today was the day everything would change. Matt and I had planned everything down to the smallest detail. We'd agreed to meet at Jake's house later that evening. Melissa thought I was heading out for work, but I'd called in sick. I wasn't going to give her or Jake a chance to explain their way out of this. They'd built their web of lies, and now they were going to get tangled in it. After breakfast, I casually told Melissa that I had a long day ahead of me. She smiled and kissed me goodbye like nothing was wrong. It took every ounce of strength I had not to say something, not to give away what was coming. Instead, I forced myself to smile back and walked out the door. I spent most of the day at Matt's place going over the plan one last time. He'd pulled some strings to get access to Jake's security cameras, which conveniently covered most of the house's exterior. If Melissa showed up there tonight, we'd have all the proof we needed. We also planned to confront them directly together. It was risky, but I needed to see their faces when it all came crashing down. By late afternoon, my phone buzzed with a notification. Melissa's tracker showed she was heading toward Jake's house. My heart started racing as I watched the little dot on the map move closer and closer to its destination. Matt glanced over my shoulder and let out a low whistle. "She's bold," he muttered, not even trying to hide it. I clenched my fists, my anger simmering just beneath the surface. "She thinks I'm clueless," I said through gritted teeth. "Let's show her how wrong she is." We waited until nightfall before making our move. Jake's house was lit up like a beacon, and I could see silhouettes moving behind the curtains. Melissa's car was parked in the driveway, right next to Jake's truck. It was almost laughable how little effort they were putting into hiding their affair. Matt and I walked up to the house, my heart pounding in my chest. He gave me a reassuring nod before ringing the doorbell. There was a pause, and then the door opened to reveal Jake, looking completely stunned. Hey man," he said awkwardly, glancing between me and Matt. "What's going on?" I didn't say a word. I just pushed past him and stepped into the house. Melissa was standing in the living room, her face pale as a sheet. She was holding a glass of wine, which she nearly dropped when she saw me. What are you doing here?" she stammered, her voice trembling. I looked at her, my eyes cold and unyielding. "Funny?" I said, my voice dripping with sarcasm. "I was about to ask you the same thing." Jake closed the door behind us, his expression shifting from shock to anger. "Look, man, I don't know what you think is going on." "Don't," I snapped, cutting him off. "Don't insult my intelligence. I know everything." Melissa looked like she was about to faint. She set her wine glass down on the coffee table and took a step toward me. "It's not what it looks like," she said, her voice pleading. "I can explain." "Save it," I said, my voice rising. "I've seen the texts. I followed you here. I know exactly what's been going on." The room was silent for a moment, the weight of my words hanging heavy in the air. Melissa's face crumpled, and she started to cry, but I didn't feel a shred of sympathy. Not this time. Jake tried to step in, but Matt blocked his path. "I wouldn't," Matt warned, his voice low and threatening. "I trusted you," I said, turning back to Melissa. "I loved you, and this is how you repay me? By sneaking around with him? By turning me into a fool?" She didn't respond, just stood there sobbing, her face buried in her hands. Jake, meanwhile, looked like he wanted to disappear. I reached into my pocket and pulled out my phone. "You see this?" I said, holding it up. "This is the footage from your driveway. You've been caught, Melissa. Both of you. There's no talking your way out of this." Her head snapped up, her eyes wide with panic. You recorded us? I didn't have to, I replied coldly. Your actions speak for themselves. For the first time, Jake looked genuinely afraid. He tried to laugh it off, but the sound came out hollow. Come on, man. This is all a misunderstanding. Shut up, I snapped, my voice cutting through the room like a knife. You're nothing but a coward. And you, I said, turning back to Melissa. You're no better. I could see the realization dawning on her face, the moment she understood just how badly she'd screwed up. But it was too late. The damage was done. Matt and I left without another word, leaving them to stew in their guilt. As we drove away, I felt a strange mix of emotions. Anger, betrayal, sadness, but also a sense of relief. For the first time in weeks, the truth was out in the open. And now I could finally start to figure out what came next. The silence in the car was deafening as Matt drove me home. My hands trembled in my lap, the adrenaline from the confrontation still coursing through my veins. I had exposed them, but the weight of what came next loomed over me. What was I supposed to do now? How do you pick up the pieces of a shattered life? When I got home, the house felt colder, emptier. Melissa wasn't there yet, and I knew she'd probably gone somewhere to regroup with Jake. The thought made me sick. I poured myself a drink and sat in the dark, staring at the Christmas tree we'd decorated just days ago. It felt like a mockery now, all the bright lights and cheerful ornaments. An hour later, the front door creaked open. Melissa walked in, her eyes red and puffy from crying. She stood in the doorway, clutching her purse like a shield, and for a moment, neither of us said anything. Finally, she broke the silence. Can we talk? She asked, her voice barely above a whisper. I didn't look at her. Talk about what? How you've been lying to me for months. How you made a fool out of me in front of everyone. She flinched at my words, tears streaming down her face. It wasn't supposed to be like this, she said, her voice cracking. I didn't mean to hurt you. I laughed bitterly, finally meeting her gaze. You didn't mean to hurt me? Melissa, you've been sneaking around with Jake for God knows how long. You lied to my face every single day. How do you think that feels? She collapsed onto the couch, burying her face in her hands. I didn't know how to stop, she sobbed. It just happened. I shook my head, disgusted. That's not an excuse. You had a choice and you chose to betray me, over and over again. For the first time, anger flickered across her face. It wasn't just me, she snapped. You've been distant for years. You don't even see me anymore. Jake. He made me feel alive again. Her words hit me like a punch to the gut, but I refused to let her twist this around. So this is my fault now? I asked, my voice rising. You're the one who cheated, Melissa. You're the one who destroyed our marriage. She didn't respond, just sat there crying, her shoulders shaking. I turned away, unable to look at her anymore. The woman I'd loved, the woman I thought I knew, was a stranger now. Get out, I said finally, my voice cold and flat. Her head snapped up, her eyes wide with shock. What? You heard me. Get out. Go to Jake. Go wherever you want. I don't care. Just get out. For a moment, she just stared at me, as if she couldn't believe what I was saying. Then, without another word, she grabbed her purse and walked out the door. The sound of it slamming shut echoed through the empty house. I sat there in the dark for a long time, trying to process everything. The confrontation was over, but the fallout was just beginning. And deep down, I knew this was far from the end. The house was painfully quiet after Melissa left. I sat there for hours, staring at nothing, the reality of what had just happened sinking in. She was gone, just like that. No begging, no fighting to stay. Maybe that hurt the most, how easy it was for her to walk away. I barely slept that night. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw her with him, laughing, touching, looking at him the way she used to look at me. My mind raced with questions. Had she ever really loved me? Or had I just been convenient? The next morning, my phone buzzed. Melissa. I stared at her name on the screen for a long moment before answering. "Are you okay?" she asked softly, as if she had any right to care. I scoffed. "What do you think?" She let out a shaky breath. I want to talk. Please. Face to face." I hesitated. Part of me wanted to shut her out completely, but another part, maybe the masochist in me, needed to hear what she had to say. Needed closure. "Fine," I said. "Come by in an hour." When she arrived, she looked exhausted. Her eyes were swollen from crying. Her hair was a mess, and she clutched her phone like it was the only thing keeping her together. She sat across from me at the dining table, the same table where we'd once shared holiday meals, laughed, planned our future. Now it felt like a battlefield. "I messed up," she said, voice barely above a whisper. "No kidding." She flinched but nodded. "I don't have an excuse. I don't know how it happened." I leaned back, crossing my arms. "You don't know? That's the best you've got." Tears welled in her eyes again, but I didn't care. She wasn't the victim here. "I never planned for this," she whispered. "It just started, little things, talking more, laughing, feeling noticed. And then you slept with him." I finished for her. She looked down, ashamed. "Good. I swear, I never wanted to hurt you," she said. I let out a bitter laugh. "That's funny, because you did, repeatedly, and you never stopped." She wiped at her tears, her hands shaking. "I don't expect you to forgive me. I don't know what to do now." I stared at her, my anger giving way to something colder. "That's not my problem anymore, Melissa." Her lips parted like she wanted to say something, but I didn't give her the chance. I stood up, signaling that this conversation was over. "Go be with Jake," I said. "That's what you wanted, right?" Tears spilled down her cheeks, but I didn't stay to watch. I walked out of the room, leaving her sitting there alone, just like she had left me the night before. This time, I wasn't the one begging for answers. I wasn't the one waiting for someone to choose me. I was done. Melissa stayed sitting at the dining table for what felt like an eternity. I could hear her quiet sobs from the other room, but I felt nothing. No sympathy, no regret, just exhaustion. She had already made her choice. Now it was my turn to make mine. When I finally walked back in, she looked up at me with tear-streaked cheeks. "Is there really no way to fix this?" she asked, her voice trembling. I didn't even hesitate. No, a fresh wave of tears rolled down her face. "I don't want to lose you." I let out a humorless laugh. "You lost me the moment you let him touch you." She looked down, gripping the edge of the table like she was trying to steady herself. "I'll leave Jake," she said suddenly. "I'll end it. I just need one more chance." I shook my head. "I don't want you anymore, Melissa. I don't trust you. I never will again." The words seemed to break something in her. Her shoulders shook as she covered her face with her hands, her breath coming out in ragged gasps. Maybe, for the first time, she truly understood what she had done. She finally stood, looking at me like she wanted to memorize my face. "I never meant for it to end like this." "But it did," I said coldly. She nodded slowly, wiping her tears. "I'll pack my things." I didn't respond. I just watched as she disappeared upstairs, leaving me alone in the wreckage of what used to be our life. Less than an hour later, she came back down with a suitcase in hand. She paused at the front door, hesitating. "I love you," she whispered, her voice broken. I stared at her for a long moment. Then, without a word, I turned and walked away. A few seconds later, the door clicked shut behind her. And just like that, it was over.